Welcome to Scala Days Wednesday, which is the day after Tuesday where we go to Scala Days.
So if everyone could come in and find a seat, you can bring your food, whatever. I hope, is everyone awake? Yeah. I'm here in the community party in that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, more or less. I'm not awake.
You're doing a good job of sleeping.
Yes.
A few minor things. The first thing we want to mention is, I don't know if you guys, during the talks here, if you're back behind this wall, which is not actually a real wall, it's just a curtain, and you're talking loudly.
Not solid.
The sound actually comes in. Now, most people can actually hear, but for the speakers it can be a little bit distracting. So we're just asking if you're back here to try to keep your conversations toned down a little bit. If you're going to be excited and animated, that's awesome. There's actually a cool little coffee shop where a lot of people are being excited and animated, and a gorgeous scenery outside. So if you want to have a very loud animated talk, please take it outside. There's lots of cool stuff around here to do.
It's supposed to be nice today. Enjoy it. So I have a minor little announcement here, which is that one of the talks today by John Pretty was previously going to be about XML and is now going to be about dependent types. So don't go there expecting XML, but go there because it's going to be fun.
John thinks the intersection of people who are interested in XML and dependent types is narrow.
Possibly
think I disagree.
Show him wrong.
Okay, and the last thing is there actually is a contest for an Apple Watch where you need to get a selfie of people on a particular list. And one of them is Daniel. So Daniel is kindly going to take a selfie of us.
I can't use my phone under pressure. It doesn't, it's Apple technology, whatever. I just took a picture of the banner because I can't figure out how to flip the phone around.
We'll get the selfie later.
Technology is hard. Okay.
But to start off today, we have a special treat because we have Dianne Marsh. I don't know how many of you guys know Dianne Marsh. I first started following her actually because of Code Mash, which is the first conference that I've ever been to that's super family friendly and really, really welcoming. Really awesome conference. It's at a water park. So anyone who's interested, come out to come out, you know, I guess it's the Midwest, Northeast. I don't know.
It's in part of
It's in Ohio, but yeah, but what do you call this region of the world? Sandusky, I guess. The Midwest?
It's sort of the Midwest. Fake Midwest.
It's great place to come. Additionally, Dianne has written a book with Bruce Eckel called Atomic Scala, which I would argue is one of the most important books in the Scala ecosystem because it appeals to everybody. And it's actually what I plan to teach my kids Scala with. So it's a really excellent book. I helped review it. It's very, very good. Dianne is currently at Netflix, and she's going to give us a talk on leadership. As an example of Dianne's leadership, last night, while walking home, Dianne successfully navigated us around all of the policemen that were within our path.
Very important.
It was very good.
Avoid the policemen.
All right.
Give it up, Dianne.
Thank you. New clicker, so I have to test. Awesome, it worked. Wait, does it go back? It does. Okay, so we can start the talk. But actually, before I do, I wanted to give a shout out to the organizers. So as Josh mentioned, I spent a lot of time organizing Code Mash. I'm not involved with it now, but I did when I was in the Midwest. And I know how hard it is to organize a conference like this. And this venue is pretty amazing, right? Don't you think? And I don't think you guys, maybe you don't realize how much goes into actually organizing something like this. So I just wanted to spend 1 minute and just recognize all of the volunteers and all of the people that spent a lot of time organizing this conference. So could you guys just stand up? I know I want to just embarrass you a tiny bit. Come on, speaker selection committee. Come on. All right, thank you. Anyhow, so let's talk about technical leadership. So one thing I want to do with this talk is I'm going to talk obviously from my perspective since I can't talk from yours, right? But I'm going to give you hopefully some things to think about that you can take back to your company, to your career, to your life, and maybe make a slight difference, right? You don't all work for companies that are really appreciative of technical leadership at every level, but I still think that there are some things that you can do, right? So I'm going to give you some of these ideas, but I really am confident that there are people in the audience who have great ideas and great experiences around technical leadership in their company that we could all benefit from. So it would be silly for me to stand up here and just talk from my experience. What I want to do at the end of my talk, when we typically do questions, and we'll do those too, but I want to invite people who have experiences around technical leadership to also share those with us, because I really think we can all benefit. So I'm really hoping that as I talk, you guys can be thinking about what you might want to share. And I have 4 Atomic Scala books, happy to give those to people who share experience talks. And we'll just move forward with that. All right? Fair enough? Okay. So let's start with where we're going to go today, right? I want to give you a model for understanding how to be a technical leader, how to be a leader in your organization. And the model I want you to think about, if only for today, is to act like you own the company. It's easy for us not to be a leader, right? It's easy for us to say the problems that we experience are because somebody else is in charge and they're not doing a good job. The thing about acting like you're an owner is there's nobody else to blame it on. So you either have to succeed or you have to own the fact that you're failing, right? So today I'm going to ask you to act like an owner. I'm going to talk about what leadership is and what it isn't. I'm going to talk about how you can build leadership into your organization and how you can grow some of these traits that leaders have, right? And I'm going to talk specifically about the challenges of technical management. So most of this talk is not going to be about management at all. It's going to be about leading wherever you are in the organization. But this one section around technical management, we're going to talk specifically about some of the challenges that we face as managers who are technical. And then at the very end, I'm going to ask you to think about what your leadership superpower is. Like, how do you want to bring leadership to your life? All right, so let's go on this journey. So again, I said I want you to own it. So do you own the decisions? Do you own the company, right? So use this to make decisions about how you're going to act, what technologies are going to choose, what paths are you going to experience, how are you going to speak up in meetings. Own it. Don't abdicate to anybody else, just own it. And this is the way that you're going to own your own job satisfaction. So what is leadership? It appears everywhere, right? We see it, you can see it on a children's playground. Kids are out playing. There's not anybody saying, this kid's going to choose the game today, and these kids are going to choose the rules for this game, and these kids are going to choose who's on teams. It just happens, right? It happens organically. They form teams, they form organizations, and they do this all by themselves, and nobody is out there arbitrating this. Well, usually, except for when we have all these organized sports, right? And I'll tell you a little story about that, about what we don't want to do, and I think we do in companies. So my kids are in elementary school. The first week of elementary school, I got this note home describing a full-page document describing the rules for Foursquare. And I'm not talking about the web app. I'm talking about the game on the playground with the 4 squares on the ground. There are rules. Did you know there are rules? Because we played this when I was a kid, and I thought you just made up the rules. But evidently there are rules, and the parent has to sign the rules so the kids can all play the right game. Okay? This is not what we want to do in our organizations, but I fear this is what we're doing, right? We're having leaders make decisions. We're not experiencing the true benefit of the group, the collective knowledge that's in the group, the innovation that, in this case, the kids bring to some stupid game, right? But that we bring to our companies and to our products. So why would we give that up? Why would we set the rules and have people sign in triplicate so that we can all play the same game? It's really about playing a different game, right? So that's what leadership is really understanding the difference that we have managers, and managers darn well better be leaders, right? Because if they're not, they're probably not going to last very long. But all leaders aren't managers. Leaders appear everywhere, even on kids' playgrounds. Leaders aren't appointed, right? Like I said, when you get hired as a manager, we don't say, "Oh, well, you know, you're now a leader." Or when you're hired as a developer, we don't say you can't be a leader, right? These leaders emerge, much like those kids on the playground. And I really think this is what we want to do in our companies. So one question we can get is around early adopters. So this is a graph of the innovation adoption life cycle. You've probably seen it before. Who's seen this before? Yeah. We can argue about where Scala sits on this today. My guess is, well, how many people vote for early majority? Anybody think we're late majority? Who thinks early adopters still? Okay, so I'm more conservative. I really was thinking more like early majority, but I'll go with your early adopters. So when I first came to Scala, we were really in the innovator early adopter stage, and people were talking about it, and that's really cool. And they were learning about the language, and the language is evolving with them, right? So they weren't necessarily leading yet. What they were doing was learning. And they were sharing what they were learning. And there's a difference. And the difference, I think, is that when you're learning, you're not necessarily trying to drive adoption. You're trying to figure out where the sharp corners are. You know, what can I do with this? I'm really trying to figure out, does this have business value or not? Once you get to the leadership stage, you're saying, yes, I think that this is where either it does have some sharp corners and we need to fix them and I'm going to help drive that, or it's ready to go. Let's talk about that. And so it's compelling to think of early adopters as leaders, and a lot of times they are, and there are a lot of people here who are early adopters in Scala who I would think are leaders. But also, it's not something that we really want to just blindly follow, because the real risk is the shiny object syndrome, right? Not just in Scala, in all technologies. I mean, how fortunate are we that all of this innovation is happening and we can latch on to whatever we think is really interesting from an R&D standpoint, but we don't necessarily want to latch on to everything from an implementation standpoint. And true leaders know the difference, right? So I promised you that we would talk about building leadership into your organization. So some organizations come with leadership ideals already, right? Some is a very command and control type of thing, and I don't want to talk about those because I don't think that those are very effective organizations. What I really want to talk about is how leaders can emerge from great organizations. And I want to give you some ideas about how you can help leaders emerge in your organization. So one thing you can do is invite people to talk in meetings, right? You can offer your opinion, and you can invite other people to offer theirs. And the more that you practice this, the more that people's opinions will be represented and really valued. And the more that your opinions are valued, the more likely you are to give them, right? So really offer those opinions as if you own the company, right? We're going to get back to that. We're saying, I own the company, so my opinion is important, and I'm going to offer it because I have to own the success of this job, of my career, of this company. Own it and just emerge as a leader inside your own organization. These, by the way, are some Scala programmer friends of mine. Oh, you can't see it very well, unfortunately, but this is a beautiful landscape in Colorado, and we were out mountain biking. And I really want to drive home the idea that you ride, you decide, right? So I, as a manager, do not want to make decisions for my team that will likely hamper their success. If I tell them, if I look at this map and I say, I think you guys should go that way, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy because I don't have to ride down that mountain, right? I'm not the one who's going to crash. So the technology decision really belongs with developers, right? The path that they take is theirs to choose. And I think it's really important to be able to provide this information to them. I need to give them context, right? Maybe if we're talking about mountain biking, I need to tell them, you know, when we need to finish. Here's the sunset, right? Maybe I give them context about how expensive of a mountain bike might be a good idea. I don't want to define their choice, but I want to say, here's our budget, right? Try to stay within that. But other than that, I need to get out of the way, and I need to let them do their work, because ultimately, I need to let them succeed. I need to help them succeed. So I really think this whole you ride, you decide is super important. But that takes courage. It takes courage from a management standpoint. It takes courage from an individual standpoint. Courage is standing up for those beliefs, even if it's really scary, right? It means telling my manager what he or she doesn't necessarily want to hear. It means telling my coworkers something that is really important, but that they might not be ready to listen to. It means saying, this project's going to be late as soon as possible, because that's what the best thing is for the company. And again, if you treat this like you own the company, you're going to have to come with that courage. So I'm going to talk for a minute about freedom and responsibility. Netflix is really famous for this, but I don't want to talk about it because of Netflix. I want to talk about it because we don't always pair the two. We say, let's give these developers a lot of freedom, but we forget about the responsibility piece. And I'll give you two stories, one personal and one professional, to kind of drive home this point. So the professional story first. A few months ago, one of the guys on my team came to me and said, this guy on his team was working on a project with another company. And he thought that the company was local because he'd been working with them over the internet, but it turned out that they were up in Seattle. And in order to effectively finish this project, it would probably be best if he went up to Seattle and worked on the project in person. And his manager was coming to me saying, do you think this is a good use of money and resources? And I said, well, you know, do we need it? You know, are the developers going to benefit from this? Let's talk a little bit about the value of what he's doing. And we talked about it. It was a really clear answer. Like, seriously, we wouldn't have been working on the project anyways if it hadn't been valuable. So I said, well, yeah, I totally think you should go. And I said, but I want to give you something to think about. He was a new manager. And I said, you don't have to come to me to ask this question. I want to push this decision down to the people who know best. So if you think it's valuable to the company, I want you to feel free to make that decision. And he said, okay, got it. And I said, but even better is if you go to him and tell him, hey, you're the one closest to this problem. You know the benefit that this solution that we're going to build will bring to the developers. You can make this choice too. We don't need to approve your travel. You can approve your own travel. And I think this is something that's really unique about pushing this information down. I don't have the information that I need to be able to make this decision, but he did. And so let's empower our developers to make as many decisions as they possibly can. Why should I be involved in that at all? Of course, if people have questions, I'm happy to brainstorm with them, but ultimately the responsibility, it lies with them, and the freedom to make that decision does as well. But I promised a personal story, and the personal story is more on the responsibility side, and how when you increase freedom, you can actually increase responsibility. So way back when I was in high school, my parents didn't give me a curfew. They said, you know, there are going to be different circumstances under which you need to come home. Some things, it's going to naturally make sense for you to be late. Some things, you know, it's going to make sense for you to be home earlier. You decide what a reasonable time is based on the circumstance itself. Okay, now this is a lot of responsibility for a 16-year-old. And I knew, as the oldest, if I screwed this up, not only was I messing it up for myself, but I was messing it up for my siblings. Well, I'm not actually sure I cared about them at the time. But anyways. But they gave me this responsibility. And they said, choose what a reasonable hour is. And you know what? I think I never pushed the boundaries. So if my friends had a midnight curfew, they were coming in at 11:59 and 27 seconds. I didn't do that, right? I didn't push up against the boundary. I place that analysis around what's a reasonable time. I got home at a reasonable time. Never had a curfew. So I think that that's a case where you can actually see that the more freedom we give to people, the more responsibility they'll take, and how you can get unexpected results from that, right? So hopefully things like that you can bring in a business context will help you talk to your teams about how they can also increase their freedom without scaring people. So I've talked a lot about sort of setting the stage for leadership, but I want to talk about some traits that leaders have and what leaders actually do on a daily basis. And like I said, we're not necessarily just talking about managers here, we're talking about leaders everywhere, okay? One of the most important things that leaders bring to the table is vision. You really have to own your domain, right? You need to understand this completely. If you own a company, you better understand where your company is going. If you're owning a technology decision or a team, you better understand where that's going. This is your responsibility. Own this vision. If you're a tech lead, you better know what you're working on. So really own it. Just bring all of yourself to that decision every single day. Strategize. So really think about how to get from that vision to reality. Leaders spend a lot of time figuring out strategy, and I think that this is something that's often overlooked, especially when you're in the early adopter phase. You might want to just jump in and try stuff, and that makes sense. But if you're actually trying to push forward an idea, you sometimes need to strategize around it. If you don't communicate an idea, it's as if you don't have it. I think there are lots and lots of smart people in our industry who have really great ideas up here, and they don't communicate them well. They might talk about them in ways that none of us understand. They might talk about them in ways that 10% of the people understand. But is that really effective? So one of the reasonings behind writing the Atomic Scala book was to try to really communicate the benefit of the language to a beginner, because at the time, there was so much discussion about how difficult this language is and about how it just wasn't appropriate to use it. And when Bruce and I talked, we thought, you know what? If we can write a book for beginners, and if we can get beginners to use it, that's really the way to go, right? If we can write a book so that beginners feel that the language is approachable, then we've done something for the field. And so it was really important for us to communicate that in such a way that didn't assume a lot of prior knowledge. I think that's one thing, a mistake that we make a lot of times, is we assume everybody's bringing the same thing to the table. I'm making a lot of assumptions in this talk about what you're bringing to the table, right? Call me on those things. Hey, Diane, you didn't talk about that. We don't have that perspective. Those are the types of things we need to talk about. Great leaders inspire their team. They inspire their manager. They inspire their peers. They inspire people that work for them. They inspire people in the community because they're so passionate about their ideas, and they can see they describe how you can take that vision to reality through strategy, and they really communicate it well. If you have the best idea in the world and you don't inspire your team or the community, that team is going to start following somebody else who does inspire them. So think very carefully about how you're inspiring other people. Remaining flexible. This is something that's really interesting. You know, we talk about this with Agile, right? Is that we're remaining flexible. Sometimes, though, Agile with a capital A is so inflexible that we don't recognize it. So, do we have a plan? Sure. Will we act on all of it? Probably not, right? We have a strategy, and we're going to remain flexible. The team changes, the market changes, the company changes, new opportunities emerge. True leaders recognize this. They're constantly taking in input from all the things in their lives, like things that are completely unrelated, apparently, right? And bringing that to the table and figuring out where to go next. And so continuing to evolve that strategy and continuing to remain flexible with their approach. Listening. So, how many people think they're great listeners? You guys are being super great in this room, right? But that's what happens when we have one person up here talking and other people listening, especially when Josh gave the warning about not talking in the back. But listening is one of those things that is really hard to do well. And I'll give you an example. So Chris and I were at a conference a few weeks ago, and we were talking, I think you were in that group, Chris. We were talking about leadership, and we were talking about evolving a team and growing a team. And we were talking about listening. We were talking about listening, but we weren't exhibiting listening. So at some point, about 40 minutes into the conversation, I realized that of the 20 people in the conversation, everybody was engaged. Nobody was looking at their phones or doing anything like that. But only about 8 people were talking. And those people were dominating the conversation. And the other 12 people were sitting there politely listening. And I realized, oops, we did it again, right? We stopped listening. We're talking about listening, and we're still not listening. So I stopped the conversation and I said, you know what? I want to hear what you guys, how you guys became such great listeners. That would benefit me greatly, to understand how you became such great listeners. And we were able to get those people in the room to talk about how they listen, like how they sit there, what influenced their lives around listening. This was really interesting stuff that we wouldn't have benefited from if we wouldn't have actually stopped the conversation. And I wonder in your meetings at your companies, if you could look at around the room and see who's engaged but not talking, and wonder what they could bring to the conversation if you invited them in. Because we have different people. Everybody comes with different sensitivities, right? We have some people who like to process a lot internally, and some people who process externally, right? So the internal processors are thinking about everything that's going on in that conversation, and they're not talking because they're thinking and they're listening. And the external processors, the thought comes in and the words go out, right? It's just like a nice little stream of information continually. And it doesn't give those internal processors time to talk. So one of the strategies we came up with after we finally shut up and started listening was if we gave these better listeners more information, internal processors, more information ahead of time about the topics that we were going to discuss, they could internalize that information and feel like they were ready to contribute earlier than when they were still processing while the conversation has already taken a different direction before they've actually formulated their thoughts. So I think 2 things, right? Prepare the people in your meetings for ideas that you're going to talk about, because I bet these deep thinkers have super great ideas and you're just not hearing them. But also, every once in a while, stop the meeting and invite people to talk. It's a little awkward, but I think it's really, really beneficial. And if you tell them ahead of time that you're going to do this, they'll feel a lot better about it. Managing up. So when you read this, how many people think that I'm talking about manipulating? Feels like it, right? That's not what I'm talking about. So try not to think of manipulation in leadership ever, because that's not really where we want to go. The best way to illustrate this is when I was a consultant, the best advice I ever got was, hey, your job is to make your customer look great. Consultants sit behind the scenes. They do all kinds of stuff. They don't often get accolades. There's no public recognition. There's no, they're not the ones writing blog posts and out giving talks on what they've developed. But they contribute a lot to the success of the team because that's their job. Their job is to make their customer look great. In the same way that your job is to make your team look great and to make your boss look great, right? Really make that project a success. If you owned the company, how would you run this project? What changes would you make? That's what managing up is. Making sure that your manager has all the information that he or she needs to make good decisions, identifying opportunities to do things differently, and communicating those out. That's managing up. Managing sideways, similar, but with the distinction that when you're talking about your peers, you probably have a really great sense for what their strengths are and what their goals are, what their aspirations are, and where they sit today. Can you help them? If you know that somebody wants to do a talk at a conference, can you help them find a conference to speak at, prepare a talk, prepare content? If you know somebody's learning a programming language, can you help organize some study sessions? How can you help improve the situation for everyone? How can you raise the water for everyone that's on the team? Because that's what you would do if you owned the company, right? You try to make this a great environment for everyone. And that's what we're talking about when we say manage sideways. I saved feedback for last because I think it's the most important. The biggest gift you can give someone is feedback about how they're doing and how they could improve. Hopefully you all work in companies that are really great about feedback and that this is non-threatening in any way. How many people do 360s where you evaluate up, down, sideways? Fewer than I thought, actually. So I think 360s are really great because it gives you the opportunity to really exercise that feedback muscle and really talk to everyone about what you see from your perspective. And the point is, you're not always going to be right. In my 360, sometimes I get very conflicting feedback from two different people because they're seeing a different perspective, right? That's my information to process, and it's a gift to me that this is how these two different people perceive what I'm doing. So even if you don't work in a company that does 360s, let me tell you about a Scala friend of mine who every year sends out 360s to a request for 360s to his friends. He sends out this questionnaire: what could I do better? Could you please help me because I'm really interested in my own personal growth? And this guy is thirsty for feedback. I'm not that proactive, but I think it's amazing, right? And I think that's an opportunity for all of us to really think about who should we ask for feedback. I have another friend who asks his daughter to do 360s every once in a while. He takes her to a coffee shop and he says, hey, so how am I doing as a parent? Can we talk about this? And I want to give you a little bit of feedback about, like, how you're doing with dinner, because, it's really kind of slow that you eat slowly. And, Mom and I would kind of rather have you speed it up a little instead of getting distracted. So he really does this 360 with his daughter, and I think that's pretty crazy, right? Crazy in a good way. So 360s and feedback in general, a great way to really figure out how to improve. We haven't talked a lot about managers. How many people in this room are managers today, manage a team? Also more than I thought. Okay, so this big block of rock that we're seeing in this picture, that's kind of how I feel sometimes when I'm thinking about the challenges of technical management. If I could just bore through the rock and get to the other side, there's really cool technical problems to solve. But I have to figure out how to get there. I have to figure out how to do all the other things that are my job first. And I think one of the big challenges when you first become a manager and you're technical is that you want to roll your sleeves up and get in there and code. And that's not necessarily always the best thing to do. But you also feel like you're not contributing if you're not coding. I think the turning point for me was when I caught myself saying, I didn't get anything done all day. All I did was go to meetings. And I realized that, that's my job, right? So I think it's important to exercise your technical muscle, right? You need to find a way to keep yourself technical, but you also need to recognize that rolling your sleeves up and writing code is not necessarily always the best thing for your team. Your time might be better spent as a manager hiring for that team or figuring out ways to simplify the problem that we're trying to solve, reduce scope, etc. Rolling up your sleeves is probably a little scary for your team because you have lots of other responsibilities and you probably won't get things done on the schedule that they need them done. And I think it's just cold, hard fact, right? But a great way to remain technical is to organize and work on internal hackathons. If you can work with your team, you can do technical things together and you can sort of gain an appreciation for what they do every day. right? You can really understand that. And I also worked on a hackathon where my team is engineering tools, and so we provide tools for the other developers at Netflix to use for build, bake, and deploy. So we had a hackathon, and I sat with another team that I never work with and watched them use our tools and worked with them on them. Wonderful experience in terms of enlightening for the manager, right? So internal hackathons, working with your team is a great idea for keeping that technical muscle. One of my peers at Netflix works on a lot of off-critical path projects, so he picks something up. It doesn't have to be delivered on any time schedule. Usually they're internal projects, and he keeps himself feeling very technically relevant working on these things. And I think that that's also a really great idea. So shout out to the podcasters in the room. Dick, well, saved my life many, many times. I felt like I got my little infusion of what was going on in the Java world for many years by listening to the Java Posse. I understood where the industry was going because Dick did all the hard work for me. So really appreciated that, and I think that there are other podcasts like Scalawags today that you can use to continue to learn about what's going on in the field. Learning by listening is really effective. And it also means that you can do it while you're driving, you can do it while you're doing other things. And I think that it's really important to find those podcasts that speak to you and that really keep that infusion of knowledge alive. I like the Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders podcast out of Stanford. I think that this podcast is really great. They talk a lot about startups, but just understanding how they're continuing to bring value and how they're evaluating the opportunity from a value standpoint, super important, super interesting, really great, engaging talks. I love those. And I'm sure you have others as well. Recharge. So my annual retreat is now called the Winter Tech Forum, was the Java Posse Roundup. This is where I go to be among my people. It's where we do sort of a deep retreat and understand what we're doing technically. We talk about a lot of these issues, like I said, about listening. We do hackathons. This is not an advertisement for the Winter Tech Forum, but it is an advertisement for finding what your retreat is. Do you have someplace that you can go where you can recharge, where you can really immerse yourself in technology if you're a manager or if you're a developer in technologies that you don't use every day? How do you keep yourself fresh, interested, engaged, and excited, and inspired? So I want to ask you what your superpower is for leadership. I said leadership wasn't easy, right? It's much easier to abdicate, let somebody else make those decisions. But if you've decided to lead, what kind of a leader do you want to be? I'll give you some examples. Do you want to be a project leader? There are lots of resources for people who manage projects. I hope you have really good organizational skills if you're a project leader. There are project management groups that can help you with that. I think communication and follow-through are so critical to the success of great project leaders. Project leaders are what we typically call tech leads, right? How many people consider themselves to be tech leads today? Yeah, so you're already doing this, right? Are there any of those aspects of leadership, vision, strategy, communication, inspiring people? Are there any of those things that you can level up on and be a better manager of projects? Think about that. Maybe you like to be a people leader. I like to be a people leader. I like people. Well, I don't know if I like people. I like watching people grow, right? So I'm like my friend. I really am thirsty for that honest feedback. I think that's really important for people leaders. You have to be really open to feedback. And you have to be really interested in remembering to give it to people all the time. Really important. Pluses and minuses and small bits of feedback, right? Like I don't want to say to somebody for the first time ever, you know, this project, you're a failure, you're not coming through, I'm just going to fire you. Like that should not be our interaction, right? Our first interaction should be around, I'm a little concerned, tell me what I don't understand here. Explain to me what's going on. Let's talk about this. And that feedback should be delivered over a period of time where you actually have time to understand what's going on, right? Little tweaks are much easier than big tweaks. People leaders protect the culture. I joined Netflix because of the culture. I came from owning my own company where I spent 13 years building great company culture for the developers that worked on my team. Company culture is so important to me. I don't want to work in a company where I don't feel the love of the culture and feel like it's a place I want to be every day. And so people leaders really protect that culture. We protect it with every hire, right? And we're watching our teams to make sure that those teams continue to exhibit that culture and that we don't let brilliant jerks and that we don't let non-performers sneak in to the company, at least in my case, because I feel like those are poisonous things to our culture. What you can do if you want to become a people leader and you're not ready to be a manager yet is you can kind of test the waters. Help recruit the coworkers. Who have you worked with before that you would love to work with again, right? Can you bring these people, the names of these people, to your manager or to your recruiting team and talk to them about why I think this would be a great person to work at our company? This is somebody I'd like to work with again. So helping to recruit coworkers is one way you can amp up your skills on people management. Maybe you're an idea leader, right? Maybe you like to speak at conferences. Maybe you want to, but don't today. Maybe you want to write if you don't want to speak. But figuring out how to bring your ideas forth, to give them an audience, is what people who want to be idea leaders do. Organizing internal events is a great way to get your feet wet in this. Maybe organize a Toastmasters group at your company or some internal lunch and learns or something like that. Just get your feet wet on getting those ideas out there. Get involved with local user groups. Figure out what that means. Maybe you want to be a Scala leader. What you can't see is on this little girl's t-shirt, she had a Scala logo. Oh, it got lost. I'm so sorry. Anyways, but if you want to be a leader in Scala, what can you do, right? Well, you can be welcoming of newcomers. This is a really, really smart community. You guys have great ideas. Understand that we all learn things differently and that we aren't all going to approach the same problem in the same way, and that there are several solutions to a problem. Respect that journey. Respect that people do learn differently and help them, right? Don't turn this into an adversarial thing. Help the other Scala developers, the new Scala developers especially, grow in this community. And if you want more ideas about how to help, I'll do a little advertisement for Dick's talk at 3:40 p.m. Anyways, he's going to talk about how Scala needs you and how you can contribute to the community. I think this is a great way to get involved. So I talked about a lot of things. I talked about the way that I see leadership. I talked about my experiences with leadership. But I hope that what you've taken away from this conversation is ways that you can improve. I brought up some ideas around things that you can do around becoming a more accomplished leader, and I'm wondering if you guys are thinking about these things as you go forward in your daily life, and I hope that you are. I want to leave you with this quote because I think this is really interesting and drives back to the point of owning your career and feeling like you own the business, acting like, using that as a model for decisions. This is a chef, and he, in this book by Michael Ruhlman, Thomas Keller, said, you can't spend half a career as someone else's employee and then suddenly one day start thinking like an owner. Think like an owner and act like you're like an owner from your very first job. Are you acting like an owner? Are you thinking like an owner? What can you do today to change those behaviors? So, I promised I would open this up to the community to bring all of your experiences around technical leadership to this forum. So, I would love it if you guys would come up and share some of those experiences. And like I said, I'm going to bribe you with Atomic Scala books. Questions also welcome, of course. First victim. Is the mic on? Don't worry, Dick's on it. I think it's on now.
Is this thing on?
It's on.
Great talk, by the way. So our leadership actually follow all those values that you have explained here. However, how do you deal with two, for example, leaders that have different visions? One is more into like functional Scala, and the other one, let's say, closure. So, which one? I mean, how do you deal with those two? They're both good leaders, but they have different visions.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you hit me with the hard one first. How do you choose between two leaders who have great ideas and they're just on a different path, right? I strongly believe, and I practice in my team, that I think it's okay to have duplication of effort, to have people go down different paths and keep that experiment alive. We're still in that early adopter phase on using both of these technologies, right? So I think we don't necessarily have to have that play out immediately. Like, we don't have to have a decision from the get-go. And so I think that by having people go down parallel paths, not prematurely optimizing toward the solution, I think that those two people can come up with something together that might be better than either of one of them on their own. So I think what's key in that, if you are going to go down parallel paths, one, you acknowledge that you're on parallel paths, and two, you make sure that the lines of communication between those two leaders are very much open and engaged. Make sure they're talking to each other. You talk to them and you say, listen, these are both great ideas. You guys need to work together to come up with a solution.
What if they don't?
What if they don't?
Yeah.
How patient are you, right? That's a really good question. I think that depends on what's going on in your organization. Ultimately, you may have to figure out what looks like it's a better vision that fits the vision and strategy for the company. My hope is that comes from the developers themselves. I think you should put off command and control decisions as much as possible.
Yeah, but in that case, they will try to tell all the developers, hey, come join Scala because Java is better than him. All those stuff. So
they're selling it?
Yes, so technically. So.
And they're both inspirational?
Yes, so yeah.
And they have really great communication skills?
Right, so one is more like Rich Hickey style, other one is Martin Nordersky, so. They're both good, both are good, but sometimes, at least in my heart, I'm leading toward the Scala direction. That's why I'm here.
That's why you're here, yeah. So I think that's tricky. I think that ideally making sure that the team is set up to respect each other and that understanding that we are going to have to come to a conclusion at some point. And that decision needs to come from a point of reference. If they're both equally valid solutions, that would be a little bit surprising that there isn't a little bit of evidence toward one or the other. And I think that spending a little time working that out would be a really great idea. One way to do that might be to ask the closure guy to make the argument for the Scala guy and vice versa. So you're arguing the other guy's points and really understanding the points that they bring to the table.
Thank you.
What do you guys think? Is that going to work?
Patience.
Patience. Excellent. Let's go with this side.
Ishai, I really like the theme of your talk about everybody being a leader and peer leadership, and that's great. And you kind of touched on this a little bit already, but could you talk a little more about how you develop that culture? Like, what are some of the keys to inspiring others and communicating that vision so that all of the people in the company do take that role as the owner?
You have to start with yourself. Right? So let's say you're in the middle of a company, right? You're maybe a middle manager or a developer, and you don't have the luxury of starting from scratch with culture, right?
Right.
Really demonstrating, leading by example of good behaviors, showing how increased freedom results in increased responsibility from your team. I know there are teams here who've made really courageous choices, like HP choosing Scala in a company that doesn't necessarily typically have freedom of technology choices, from what I understand, right? There we go. So I think that making those courageous choices and succeeding with them, right? And then communicating those out to the rest of the organization. Being an advocate for what you're doing is part of that leadership.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for your talk. So I'm a consultant, and I work for a few different companies. Sometimes I design the architecture or the APIs, but I'm always an engineer. I'm always getting my hands dirty. That leads me to my question regarding the next level of leadership for engineers and tech leads that are interested or aspiring to become better leaders. What positions can they look forward to without falling into the realm of something like a technical manager where they're not involved in the code, if they want to stay involved with the code, especially if the company that they're at doesn't have side projects they can work on?
Yeah, so I'm lucky to work at a company that has some really technical leaders that are individual contributors. They are amazing people with amazing ideas, and they're very good at communicating them out. Finding a company that supports sort of a parallel track of management and technical leadership, what you're looking for is a seat at the table, right? You want to make sure that your ideas are heard. One of the really great things about Netflix is that we really respect that if you're in the company, you deserve to be there. And so your job title, the number of years you've been there, these things aren't given weight in your argument, right? So like if you have a point that you want to make, it's not weighted by, ooh, that guy's only been here for 6 months, he probably just doesn't know, right? He has a great idea. We hired him for a reason. We're going to listen to his ideas because we really respect the fact that we brought this person in for the expertise that he brought to the table. And so finding a company that respects that and that understands that ideas come from everywhere is really critical, I think, to that success. And so I think that one of those tech lead jobs, a position where you can be a very technical person but spend a lot of time communicating, is something that it might appeal to you. I think you probably already do some of that. As a consultant, you have to spend a lot of time communicating anyways. And so even if you're in a company, practice there, right? Spending a lot of time communicating what you're doing and what the business value of it is going to earn a lot of respect, I think, in the company.
Thanks.
Hey, I just want to talk about one of my experiences. So I think a lot of people like to lead in different areas, and some people like to lead more technically than on project-based, but usually in a company it's more project-based leadership that matters. So at my company, Hootsuite, we kind of stole something from Spotify called a guild system. Mm-hmm. So while we have teams organized around product areas, we have cross-functional groups organized around technologies. So for instance, Scala or APIs or what have you, and they meet on a regular basis and talk about how we can implement things across the company, and that provides a really good place for leadership, for technical leadership and people who have really good ideas technically but not necessarily about how to complete a certain project. And I find that's really a great way to kind of encourage this leadership. No managers are in those meetings, but they make decisions about how we change things, so like Scala style, what we're going to do. And so I think that's a really great way to kind of harness that leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a great demonstration of the you ride, you decide point, right? Like you need to be in control of your own decisions, and you need to make those at the developer level. I think that's a really great approach. All right, give this man a book. Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, so I'm a brand new first-time manager, and maybe there are other new managers out there. And we don't necessarily have the experience to lean on leading a new team. And I was wondering if you had some advice. You spoke earlier about freedom and responsibility through the lens of different personalities in the engineering department.
So are you saying that there are challenges on your team in terms of understanding how to deal with different types of personalities?
I'm wondering if you have some advice for new managers about the spectrum of personalities and working with them.
So the question is, do I have some insight about the spectrum of personalities on a team? That's a good question. There are some things you can do around understanding different people's personalities. I think we all come to conversations thinking people are going to be like us, right? And so understanding that people think differently and that they act differently because of that is something that I think that new managers do need to appreciate. There are some, I'm going to talk a little bit about personality tests, but everybody probably knows about Myers-Briggs, but one of the tests that I like is a strengths finder, and it really talks about what the strengths are of each person on the team if they do this test. And one of the interesting aspects that the author talks about is that we sometimes talk about improving your weaknesses, but this guy is really strongly of the opinion that you can make tiny improvements in your weaknesses, but you really should emphasize your strengths. And so figuring out how to put a team together to emphasize those strengths is a really great idea. That might be something that's interesting for you. I think just talking to them and asking them, what's your career aspiration? Where do you want to go from here? What interests you? And really building that relationship with each one of those people is really important. I think that there's a challenging personality I mentioned this briefly in The Brilliant Jerk. This is somebody that's the hardest person for a new manager to fire. So The Brilliant Jerk produces amazing amounts of code. They work so hard and they do so much work that the rest of your team is just paled in comparison to what The Brilliant Jerk brings to the table, right, in terms of output. But they're a jerk to your team. And this is poisonous. And this is something that you want to deal with as quickly as possible so that you don't lose the rest of your team. And when I first encountered a brilliant jerk, I was brainstorming with a friend of mine, and he said, what I've seen with the brilliant jerk is that when you fire the brilliant jerk, the rest of the team levels up. The rest of the team fills in the gap and actually produces more than what the team was producing before with the brilliant jerk. It's like the brilliant jerk keeps them down and they can't produce, right? The brilliant jerk goes away and the rest of the team rises up. And I did not believe it. I was like, okay, that might have happened in your case, but it's not going to happen here. Like I'm already overworked. I can't take on new work right now, and I'm afraid to let this guy go because all it means is that I'm going to go from working 50 hours a week to working 70 hours a week, right? This is long before I joined Netflix. And he said, no, trust me, Dianne. This is the way you got to go. And you know what? I got rid of the brilliant jerk, and he was right. And in situations since then, I've counseled other people, and I've encountered the same situation myself. And each time, it's actually acted out just like that. There's a really good book called The No Asshole Rule that talks about this, and there's a podcast if you want the condensed version that really talks about the brilliant jerk and how poisonous it is to your team. And so I think that for all new managers, I think it's super critical to really understand that persona. That's the one that's the most dangerous, I think.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We have one more over here, I think.
Hi, thanks for a fantastic talk. You talked a little bit about you talked a lot about freedom and also the coupling with responsibility and accountability. And we talked about the happy paths, but I wondered how you might deal with situations where you give people freedom or you receive freedom and then it's not working, and it's not that it's not a brilliant jerk or it's an underperformer, but that particular thing is just, it's not working out.
So are you saying, so he's saying, so we're talking about freedom and responsibility, but what if you give the freedom and the responsibility piece isn't there?
Yeah, and also, what does that responsibility piece mean? So
I think it's easiest to understand, again, if we put this through the lens of, you own the company, right? So if you have the freedom to make a decision, you have the responsibility to make sure it's a good one for the company, for the team, for the product, right? And if that decision is bad, then you need to make it right. And I mean, in terms of both the leader and in terms of whoever made this decision at whatever level the decision was made at, whether this was at, you know, the highest level in the organization or the prep cook level that we heard the quote from at the end of the talk. Make it right. And if this person exhibits a history of not making it right, then the person's probably not a good culture fit. One of the reasons why Netflix hires fully formed adults, as we call them, people who have experience, is because they bring that understanding of responsibility to the table. They've matured in such a way that they're bringing that responsibility to the table. I think it would be interesting, but not necessarily productive, to see what happened with newer grads who don't have that same sense of responsibility.
Thank you.
Are we out of time?
So if you need, those of you who are still in line for questions, I'm sure Dianne would be more than willing to talk to people. There's 3 books left for experiences, right?
Yep, 3 books.
And
you get one. He gets one.
Oh, good. Okay, there are 2 books left.
So so come find me. I also have chaos monkeys, cute little squishy figurines, and a bunch of stickers. So happy to hand out any of those things. Thank you so much.